Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, True Scary Stories. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it in your country? Have you shared my channel with your friends yet, or are you keeping these whispers all to yourself? You settle deeper into your pillow, don't you? That familiar, heavy silence descends in your room, broken only by the low whir of your computer fan. Or maybe that's just the sound of the atmosphere compressing around your head, anticipating what I'm about to tell you. Tonight, you aren't just listening, you're here. You are standing on the crumbling, wind-battered docks of Port Sentinel. The air is thick with the scent of salt, rust, and something infinitely colder, something that smells like old stone and regret. Out there, across the violently churning gray waters, stands the Point Despair lighthouse, a skeletal finger of concrete and brick, abandoned for 50 long, silent years. The wind here doesn't just push you, it tries to peel you away, exposing the soft, fearful things underneath. It's the kind of place where you instinctively know the local cemetery is full and its residents aren't resting easily. It's beautiful, in that way only places that actively want you dead can be. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If not, well, you'll probably be fine, but if you do disappear tonight, at least I'll have a few extra cents for a decent burial. Let me know where you're posting from and what local time it is. I love knowing that I'm keeping some of you awake until the sun starts to crawl back up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that low, unsettling hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk the last few hundred yards toward the lighthouse keeper's cottage, the loose, jagged shingle beach crunching under your boots. The locals in the single, struggling tavern, the Salted Soul, had given you the usual blend of pity and morbid curiosity. They told you the stories, naturally. They warned you, predictably. 50 years ago, Point Despair went dark, not because of a storm, not a power failure, but because the last keeper, a man named Silas Thorne, just vanished. The light never came back on. The government declared the area too unstable for automated maintenance, and the place was left to decay. The lighthouse itself is beautiful in a derelict Gothic kind of way. It's too tall, too black against the perpetually bruised sky, and you can feel the salt eating away at the very bones of the structure. The whole town, Port Sentinel, feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for the massive cyclopean eye of the lighthouse to finally open again. The history of lighthouses, you know, is saturated with tragedy. It's a job defined by solitude, duty, and relentless exposure to the cruelty of the sea. One mainstream scary fact is the unsettling history of the Island Mer lighthouse mystery. In December 1900, the three keepers stationed there vanished completely. Their logbook's final entries detailed hurricane-force winds, which weather records never confirmed, and a pervasive mounting sense of panic. The last entry was signed just before they disappeared. When relief finally arrived, the tower was empty, the beds unmade, and a set of oilskins lay untouched, suggesting one of the men left without preparing for the weather. To this day, no one knows where they went. Just another job hazard, I suppose. What do you call a lighthouse keeper who disappears? You might ask. Unemployed. You jiggle the enormous brass key into the lock of the keeper's cottage door. The metal groans in protest, and the hinges shriek a sound that is both agony and warning. Inside, the air is musty, thick with the smell of mold and forgotten time. But the actual lighthouse tower is your goal. You step outside and cross the short, rocky path toward the base. You notice that the mortar between the bricks is strangely fresh near the base, a small, unsettling detail that doesn't align with 50 years of decay. The narrative here is that the townspeople think you're mad for even touching the place. Efter Hellstria Mare. I agree. They speak of the weeping sand, an obscure coastal superstition, where if a sailor's bones are buried under a certain mixture of sea sand and pulverized shells, their spirit can never fully enter the sea or the land, but remains tethered to the beacon that guided them to their death. This is the obscure or fringe horror tidbit of the hour, a little legend to chew on. The weeping sand is supposed to be found only near the oldest lighthouses, where the foundations themselves are built on the wreckage of what they were meant to save. Researchers disagree on whether the physical properties of certain deep-sea clays actually produce a quantifiable electromagnetic field capable of interfering with human psychological stability, or if this is merely a case of extreme isolation-induced psychosis in lighthouse keepers. You stand at the massive oak door of the lighthouse tower, its surface pitted and scarred like the face of a scarred giant. As you push it open, the wind whips through the gap, sounding like a muffled scream that quickly gets swallowed by the immense circular chamber you enter. It's an impossibly high, dark shaft, lit only by the gray ambient light filtering through the small, high windows of the spiral staircase that seems to corkscrew endlessly into the gloom above. You realize something unsettling. The air inside is warmer than the biting wind outside. Not warm like comfort, but warm like a fever. It's just you and the silent stone. You came here seeking a story, maybe a thrill, maybe some forgotten treasure. But you start to suspect the treasure is less gold and more, an appointment, an inescapable, unpaid appointment. You pull out your phone. No signal, of course. Wouldn't be much of a scary story if you could call for help, would it? Dark joke 1. Why did the ghost move into the lighthouse? Because he wanted to see what was up with all the dead ends. And every porchway of you fight aversion. Hey bees, dark joke 2. I've heard the food is terrible, a point to spare. I asked the local chef about his best dish, and he just said, it's a toss-up between the fish and the souls of the damned. Dark joke 3. I tried to compliment the architecture here, but the lighthouse just kept giving me the cold shoulder. It's got no light, no warmth, and 50 years of baggage. Sounds like my last relationship, frankly. You check your gear, flashlight, recording equipment, maybe a protein bar. Essentials for a ghost hunt, or a final meal. The stone walls feel impossibly thick, absorbing sound and light alike. You start your ascent, listening for anything but the sound of your own anxious breathing. The iron stairs continue to sing beneath your weight, a low, drawn-out clang that seems to annoy the silence more than break it. You're pushing upwards now, section after section, past small circular windows that offer momentary, dizzying views of the churning sea and the distant miserable town of Port Sentinel. You remind yourself that you're looking for the mundane, a faulty mechanism, a secret passage, a diary. But deep down, you're hoping for something less mundane, aren't you? Something that validates the knot of dread forming in your stomach. Something worthy of a true scary story. The temperature inside shifts again. It's no longer just fever warm, it's now a cloying heavy heat, the kind that precedes a migraine. You reach a small landing, probably the keeper's sleeping quarters, and there, pushed against the curved wall, is a heavy dark wood desk. On the desk, the title is barely visible, etched into the cover, Keeper's Silence. You peel open the brittle front page. The handwriting is a furious, precise copper plate, the ink dark and dense. The dates stop abruptly 50 years ago, coinciding exactly with the disappearance of Silas Thorne and the death of the light. This is it. This is the Keeper's journal, the missing piece of the puzzle. You run your finger over the ink, feeling the slight raised texture of the despair soaked into the paper. The entry for the final recorded day is almost unreadable, scrawled with a force that tore the page in several places. The light demands sustenance. It is not a guide, it is a trap. You tuck the journal under your arm, knowing the silence in this tower is anything but empty. You recall the mainstream horror fact of the Mary Celeste, a brigantine found abandoned in 1872. Her lifeboat was missing, but the crew's personal belongings, including their pipes and tobacco, were still neatly in place. A half-eaten meal was on the table. It was as if they simply vanished into thin air, leaving no struggle, no evidence of piracy or disaster, much like Silas Thorne. The unsettling part of the Mary Celeste isn't the ghost ship itself, but the utter lack of chaos. Just a sudden, clean absence, like a vacuum in the world. Dark joke 1. Silas Thorne was always terrible at hide and seek. 50 years later, he's still losing. I'm starting to think he just wanted a permanent vacation. The journal is your guide now. It reeks of mold and brine, and you can almost hear the phantom slosh of water coming off the pages. You continue up the spiral. That unsettling cold you sensed earlier is back, but localized now, concentrated on the very air immediately surrounding the stone staircase, while the center of the tower remains feverish. It's like climbing through a marble of hot and cold energy. Now for the obscure horror tidbit. Have you ever heard of a tethered watcher? In some very old New England lighthouse lore, it's believed that if a keeper dies alone on duty, their spirit becomes inextricably bound to the weight of the light apparatus itself. They don't haunt the tower, they become the mechanism, forever turning, forever maintaining a duty they can no longer fulfill. Their only manifestation is a faint rhythmic sound, the sound of their endless labor, and there it is, the sound. It's faint, but distinct, a dry, scraping shush, shush, shush. It's not the wind, which is a loud, chaotic bellow outside. This sound is internal, metallic, and perfectly rhythmic. It sounds like something enormous, heavy, and very old is being dragged across rough stone right above you. You pause, flashlight beam fixed on the next curve of the stairs. The scraping doesn't stop. It's tireless, like a broken record playing the same 3-second loop of metallic friction. You press your ear to the cold stone wall, and the sound is louder here, amplified by the stone itself. It feels less like dragging and more like a massive, deliberate grind. Researchers disagree on whether chronic exposure to low-frequency infrasound, like the kind produced by massive ocean storms and old resonant stone structures, can induce genuine hallucinations, or if the perceived phenomena are merely a psychological projection of the listener's expectation of the macabre. Either way, this scraping sound is making the hairs on your arms stand up, and it's definitely not your imagination. You consider running back down, but the thought of leaving the journal, the only thing that connects you to Silas in his final moments, is worse. You realize you've inherited his curiosity, and perhaps his fate. You grip the journal tighter. Dark joke too. I'm not saying Silas Thorne was a bad keeper, but the last entry in his logbook was just, note to self, next time, pack a raincoat and maybe a priest. The scraping continues, drawing you upward, a sinister metronome timing your approach. You feel that the source of the sound is closer now, maybe just one flight above. It's a compelling, hypnotic rhythm. You can't stop. The tower is pulling you up like a magnet. Dark joke 3. What's the difference between a lighthouse and a vampire? A vampire is easier to get rid of. Just invite it in. You take a deep breath. The heat is back, now slightly mingled with a faint metallic ozone smell, like burnt electronics or, more disturbingly, burnt copper and old blood. You're close to the lantern room. You can practically taste the despair. The rhythmic scraping intensifies as you ascend the final, narrow spiral. It's no longer a gentle shush. It's a heavy, determined grind. The iron staircase vibrates under your feet, and you realize the sound isn't just above you. It's coming from the very stone and metal of the tower itself. It's a sound of immense, unseen weight and motion. You emerge onto the watch deck, a small, circular landing just beneath the lantern room. You can see the grime-coated brass railings and the immense vaulted glass panes that make up the dome above. Here, the air is freezing, a sharp, penetrating cold that hits you like a physical blow, instantly raising goose flesh. This is the intersection of the two temperatures, the feverish warmth below and this abyssal cold above. You check the journal again. You flick to an earlier entry about a week before Silas disappeared. He wrote, "The drafts are impossible. The cold comes from within the stone now, drawing the heat out of my bones. But I hear the grinder, always the grinder. It wants me to stop looking up." The grinder. That's what the scraping is. You look up through the central aperture into the lantern room. The massive, beautiful Fresnel lens is there. A cathedral of glass and brass, silent and utterly dead. It should be gleaming, but it's covered in 50 years of dust, salt, and bird droppings. It looks blind. But the rhythmic scraping is coming from inside the mechanism supporting that lens. You climb the last few steps. The lantern room is huge, but claustrophobic with all the machinery. The sound immediately stops. Silence. A profound, echoing silence that rings louder than the scraping ever did. You spin around, flashlight beams sweeping across the vast glass enclosure. Nothing but salt-streaked glass, cold metal, and the endless gray sea. You're standing next to the massive cast iron base of the lens. The sheer size of the original apparatus is staggering. It's a mainstream scary fact that the history of navigational aids is plagued by phantom lights. Reports from sailors of seeing lighthouses lit that were, in reality, either decommissioned or known to be dark. These aren't just one-off sightings. Multiple vessels have documented seeing the same phantom beacon, often leading them directly onto rocks. The most famous reports often coincide with areas of known, unresolved maritime disaster. It's the sea mocking its victims, giving them hope just to drown them faster. You turn your attention to the lens. The glass is flawless, perfectly cut, a testament to old-world engineering. You wipe a patch clean with your sleeve. The lens doesn't just magnify light. It focuses it, concentrates it into a single, blinding, purposeful beam. What happens when that focus is turned inward? With the obscure horror tidbit for this moment concerns the concept of lux anima, light of the soul, found in some ancient Mediterranean seafaring myths. The lore dictates that a massive Fresnel lens doesn't just project light, it also acts as a psychic energy collector. It draws despair, fear, and the final moments of thought from every soul lost on the coastline it serves, focusing that psychic residue into a cohesive, sentient being that runs the light. You notice something on the metal housing beneath the lens. Fine, silvery scratches like someone or something was continuously running their fingernails across the paint. This is where the scraping came from. A restless, endless etching motion. You lean closer, flashlight pressed against the metal. The scratches form a highly complex, non-random pattern. They're not words, but they're not random either. They look like a map, or maybe the intricate wiring diagram of something that shouldn't exist. Historians still argue whether the disappearance of the lighthouse keepers at Point Despair was the result of a sudden geological shift destabilizing the structure, or if the case was deliberately suppressed by naval authorities to avoid panic regarding a potential contagion of madness among coastal workers. The official report was inconclusive, but the cover-up stories persist. Dark Joke 1, I'm going to rename this place Point Depressed. Everything here is so moody, even the tide is giving me side-eye. Dark Joke 2, what's the best way to clean a haunted lighthouse lens? With Windex, obviously. You wouldn't want to streak your visibility of the afterlife. You feel a sudden, sharp spike of the icy cold right on the back of your neck. It's like a breath, a slow, long, frostbitten breath. You jump and spin, swinging the light wildly. Nothing, just the salt-streaked glass. But when you look back at the scratched metal, you notice a new line. A single, fresh, silvery scratch, 1 inch long, running across the top of the pattern. The scratching has started again. You hear a laugh then. It's dry, brittle, and sounds like broken shells. It's coming from the bottom of the tower, and it's slowly, softly echoing its way up the spiral stairs. Dark Joke 3, my biggest fear isn't ghosts, it's accidentally becoming a ghost myself and realizing I still have an email response I haven't sent yet. You know you need to get out of the lantern room, but the journal is calling you back. You sit on the cold floor and open the diary to the final full entry before the scribbled trap warning. The entry reads, the light called. I did not turn it on. The light turned itself on. The laugh, that dry, brittle sound, fades before it reaches you, absorbed by the tower's stone guts. But the cold remains, sitting on your shoulders like a shroud. You're gripping the journal now, the leather damp and slick in your hand, its pages vibrating slightly with the force of the wind that's starting to howl outside. You look out the glass and the sight is immediate and visceral. A storm is building with impossible speed. Not the usual coastal squall, but something dark, furious, and perfectly synchronized with the narrative you're reading. The waves below have mutated into violent, oil-black peaks, smashing against the base with a thunderous crack that rattles the massive lens. You flip back to Silas Thorne's journal, finding the entry for the night he recorded the light turning on, October 17th. The black gale arrived at dusk. The tower is shaking, the noise is unimaginable. It is the storm of 48, the one that claimed the Ariadne's hope. I dare not approach the mechanism, but I saw it, a green pulse in the dark, the light. It's on. Blinding, impossible flash of light erupts from the enormous Fresnel lens right beside you. It's not the steady rotating beam of a working lighthouse. It's a sudden, overwhelming glare, a static, brilliant white burst that fills the entire lantern room, leaving after images burned onto your retina. It lasts maybe half a second, but it is accompanied by an audible, deep thrum of power, a sound that vibrates in your chest cavity. Then, instant darkness. The lens is dead again, dusty, blind. You stagger back, heart hammering against your ribs. There is no power source here. The main generator shack down below is a ruin of rusted metal. The cables are long severed. This tower hasn't held power in half a century. Or, you remember the mainstream horror fact of spontaneous human combustion, SHC. Though often debunked, the idea of the catastrophic energy release from an unknown internal source, a body burning from the inside out, is a powerful horror trope. The light in this tower feels like that, a massive, self-generated internal energy surge, a blinding fire that instantly consumed itself. It's horrifying because the cause is wholly contained within the object, rejecting all external logic. You look at the machinery, frantic. The brass and copper are cold to the touch. Nothing looks disturbed, but the air smells intensely of ozone and maybe, just maybe, something that smells like burnt hair and sea salt. The obscure horror tidbit comes back to you, the tethered watcher. If the keeper became the mechanism, if his soul is the light's power source, then that flash was Silas Thorne, a moment of panic, a desperate flare of residual life. But why? You notice a small, incredibly thin wire made of tarnished copper that seems to thread its way through the intricate clockwork of the lens carriage. It wasn't visible before the flash. It looks like a single, taut vein vibrating slightly. Researchers disagree on whether the human brain possesses an unquantified bioelectrical energy field capable of inducing momentary external mechanical or electrical function in highly isolated, high-stress environments, or if all such ghostly manifestations are strictly a product of observer bias and mass suggestion. You need to know what that flash meant. You feel an icy dread, but also a growing scientific curiosity. If the light can turn on once, it can turn on again, and you definitely don't want to be staring directly into it when it does. You decide to get inside the mechanisms to see the source of the electrical phantom. Dark joke 1. I asked the storm why it was so loud. It said, I just had to drop a beat. I told it to try dropping the lighthouse instead. Dark joke 2. If this light keeps flashing, I'm going to send Silas Thorne an invoice for the emergency dental work I'll need after grinding my teeth like this. You start trying to unscrew one of the access panels on the cast iron base. The screws are rusted solid. You use a heavy wrench you brought, but the effort is immense. You hear the scraping sound return, but this time it's much faster. A manic It's like the mechanism is trying to actively resist your interference. Dark joke 3. I've started dating a girl who lives in a haunted lighthouse. You shine your light into the dark, oil-slick cavity beneath the massive lens. Immediately, the scraping stops. You see an impossible tangle of ancient gears, chains, and brass counterweights, all coated in thick, black, solidified oil. And right in the center, resting on the main driving gear, is the key. Not the key to the tower, but a smaller, intricately carved iron key, the kind that might belong to a very old clock or a music box. It's stained dark brown, maybe with rust, maybe with something else. It feels warm. That warm, strangely intimate iron key lies nestled in the cold, dead heart of the machinery. You reach in, pull it out, and immediately feel a tingling, buzzing energy radiating from the metal. It's almost soothing, a strange contrast to the terror of the spontaneous light flash. The key is clearly the source of the faint warmth you felt throughout the lower tower. You inspect a massive gearworks. The machinery is designed to rotate the lens, to turn the light in a fixed pattern. But now it's still, silent, and covered in that strange, fine, silvery dust that you saw etched into the metal earlier. You realize the scratches weren't outside the housing, they were inside the mechanics, lines of friction created by something moving at an incredible, almost desperate speed. You check the journal again, flipping forward to the last unscribbled entry. Silas wrote, "The small key is gone. It was used to wind the timing clock. It is the heart of the rotation. Without it, the light cannot move. But now, I hear it running inside the base. It is winding itself." You look at the key in your hand. It's a winding key. The mechanism was running furiously and silently, without the key in place, simply scraping against its own iron housing. Then, you notice the hands. Small, impossibly faint marks on the inner edge of the iron casing, just above the main gear. They look like fingertip impressions, 5 pale, translucent smears pressed into the solidified grease and dust. They are child-sized. This isn't a human handprint in the traditional sense. It's more like a residual impression left by unseen hands pressing against the heavy iron. The moment you see the prints, a cold breeze, not from the storm, but from the inside, sweeps past you, and the mechanism twitches. The massive lens above shakes slightly, sending a faint clink through the glass. You quickly back away, the key now clutched so tightly it hurts. This brings us to maritime lore and the mainstream scary fact of the drowning man's hand. In many cultures with strong ties to the sea, there is the belief that a drowning victim just before succumbing reaches out and leaves a permanent, often inexplicable impression on the nearest boat hull, dock post, or in this case, lighthouse mechanism. These are physical proof of the final, desperate plea for help. The prints are almost always cold to the touch, constantly weeping brine, and touching them is said to bind the observer to the spirit's final drowning moment. You resist the urge to touch the small, pale smears. Now for the obscure horror tidbit. Some remote fishing communities have a legend of the brine dolls. When a ship is lost entirely, never yielding wreckage or bodies, it's said that the ocean creates a hollow facsimile of the lost child or sailor using only salt, mist, and the sound of the wind. These brine dolls are constantly cold, perpetually weeping, and exist only to feel the light of the tower on their face. They are responsible for the small, quick movements you sense. They are looking for their way home, and they are using the light as their eye. Researchers disagree on whether a series of reported sightings of small humanoid figures on the Point Despair rocks in the 1950s, immediately following the lighthouse's demise, were the result of a local geological phenomenon known as sea shimmer caused by thermal inversion layers, or if they were genuine paranormal manifestations related to the unsolved wreck of the fishing vessel, the Lost Daughter 50 years ago. Dark joke 1. I've decided to be more like the lighthouse keeper's gear, completely resistant to being wound up by outside influence. You hear a soft thump from the stairwell below, almost like a piece of wood falling. You freeze, straining your ears over the roar of the gale. The sound doesn't repeat. It just was. Dark joke 2. What's the best way to deal with a ghost in a lighthouse? You give it a job. Ghosts love repetitive, soul-crushing tasks. You decide you can't stay in the lantern room, the air is too charged, and the light is too unpredictable. You take a quick glance out the glass, hoping to see the town, but the world is just a swirling, chaotic canvas of gray and black. The light could turn on at any moment. You need to get back to the journal and the main living quarters, which are at least sheltered. Off pay to Anne Prue Cobble. As you start down the spiral stairs, the small iron key in your hand feels heavier now, almost like it's vibrating a message. Doesn't feel like a mechanism key anymore. It feels like a key to a door, a very, very old door. Dark joke 3. I tried to sell the key on eBay, but the listing was removed. Apparently, cursed iron key capable of summoning maritime horrors violates their policy on hazardous materials. You descend, leaving the cold lantern room and re-entering the feverish warmth of the main tower shaft. You hurry back to the keeper's desk, the journal spread open, waiting for you to piece together the tragic life and terrifying end of Silas Thorne. The scraping is gone, but now you hear the low, distant clanking of metal on stone somewhere far below the base of the tower. It sounds like someone doing heavy, repetitive work in a deep, dark well. You're back at the keeper's desk, the damp journal spread open, the bizarre, warm key sitting on the page, almost as if marking its own place. The feverish heat in the room is oppressive now, making you feel drowsy, almost disoriented. It's hard to focus on the spidery script of Silas Thorne, but you force yourself. You need the narrative, the context for the horrors you've experienced in the lantern room. You skip past the mundane entries, supply requests, weather reports, all the standard loneliness of a keeper's life, and jump straight to the final weeks, the ones written in a progressively frantic hand. You start to see an unsettling pattern in the log entries. The dates become meaningless. They are replaced by descriptive phrases, night of the endless rain, the hour of the slow turn, and then, repeatedly, the presence is at the glass. Silas Thorne was charting something, not logging. He wasn't tracking the light's performance, but the steady, malignant growth of a thing that was watching him. One entry stands out, written in bold, slashing strokes. The storm is the veil. It is not danger. It is cover. The gale is what he uses to approach. The bring bee just brings his mass closer to the stone. The storm outside, a chaotic maelstrom of wind and sea, now feels less like a natural event and more like a tool, a shield for something vast and slow, something that uses the darkness and the noise to maneuver itself into place. This confirms the local lore you heard at the Salted Soul. One mainstream scary fact often cited in historical records is the concept of the storm hag, or hag ship, a supernatural entity that doesn't cause the storm but rides in its wake. Naval historians have sometimes recorded accounts of entire convoys of ships being inexplicably directed by their captains toward known hazards, only for the captain, once rescued, to claim they saw a figure or a distinctively dark vessel, barely visible in the torrent, that seemed to command their course. The storm hag is the predator who herds its prey into the jaws of the natural world. You look at the journal again. Silas was being stalked. The presence grew stronger every night the storm raged, almost feeding on the raw energy of the gale. The obscure horror tidbit found in Scandinavian folklore is the legend of the anchor-bound soul. It is believed that if a keeper or sailor is tempted into madness by a creature of the sea, they are not allowed to die in peace. Instead, the creature binds their soul to a heavy, vital piece of equipment, an anchor, or in this case, the immense weight of the lens mechanism. The soul's despair then acts as an irresistible magnetic force, causing the mechanism to turn and flash, drawing more souls to the same terrible coastline. The presence wasn't just watching Silas, it was preparing to make him its anchor. You trace the words, the presence is at the glass, it is getting larger, I can hear it sigh through the stone, it's waiting for the light to shine steadily, the light must never, ever be continuous. Suddenly, the whole tower gives a deep structural groan that sounds like 1,000 tons of stone shifting its weight. The scraping, the grinder begins again, much closer this time, and it sounds like it's coming from under the floorboards of the keeper's room. In this descending day, when the bee hears that up, you realize the stone spiral staircase itself is the source. The tower is winding itself. Researchers still argue whether the numerous documented cases of lighthouse keepers committing suicide in the 18th and 19th centuries were primarily due to the intense psychological pressure of sensory deprivation and extreme isolation, or if these locations harbor unique, locally sourced paranormal entities that specifically target solitary individuals. Dark joke 1, I told the presence that it needs to stop stalking people and get a hobby, like maybe knitting, Or, not existing. You stand up, moving away from the desk. The floor feels subtly unstable. You need to know what Silas did next. You flip to the final scrawled page, the one with the unreadable warning. But before that, there's one more full, coherent entry. It's short and terrifying. He showed me. He used the light. The presence did not come from the sea. It came from below. The light is not for the ships. It is for the dark. It is a chimney for the deep. The last thing he did before he vanished was to bolt something. But what? Dark joke 2. I asked the presence if it was happy with its current career path. It just sighed and said, "It's a dead-end job, but the hours are flexible." You look down at the floor, expecting to see a trapdoor. Nothing. Just old, dusty, sea-warped wood. But the heavy clanking you heard earlier, the one that sounded like metal on stone in a deep well, is getting louder. It's beneath you, unquestionably. Dark joke 3. What's Silas Thorne's favorite kind of music? Heavy metal. Specifically, the sound of his own ghostly mechanism grinding itself into powder. You lift your gaze to the wall, to the final cryptic warning you saw before. The light demands sustenance. It is not a guide, it is a trap. The realization of the lighthouse's true function. A chimney for the deep sinks into you like cold water. The presence didn't come from the water. It came from under the ground, drawn up by the unnatural power of the spontaneously flashing light. You stand motionless, listening to the metallic clanking that rises from the floor, and the manic, quick fur of the grinder that pulses through the walls. You glance back at the mechanism base in the lantern room, imagining the frantic, scraping energy. The movement is tied to the light, and the light is tied to the presence. You realize what you have to do. You need to find a way to permanently disable the light. But as you review the main gear housing with your mind's eye, a crucial detail hits you: the missing gear. The massive cogwheel that drives the main rotation shaft had a distinct, noticeable gap, a place where a complex secondary gear should have been, meant to slow the rotation and ensure the proper flash pattern. It wasn't just missing, the iron was clean where it should have been, almost as if it had been surgically removed. But if that vital piece is gone, how can the gears still grind? How can the massive mechanism still rotate itself, even momentarily? The missing gear should have rendered the entire light immobile. And yet, the metallic sound pulses through the floor. It's no longer the steady clanking of heavy work. It's a desperate, rapid ping, 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 ping of metal hitting metal in a panicked, chaotic rhythm. The tower is losing control. As the frantic sound peaks, you look out one of the small windows, peering through the storm. The wind is dropping, but the visible world is being swallowed by a suffocating, dense, unnatural sea fog. This is not a normal mist. It moves too fast, too low, hugging the rocks and the coastline like a living gray entity. It creeps inland, blotting out the distant lights of Port Sentinel, leaving you completely isolated, enclosed in a sphere of whiteout conditions. The obscure horror tidbit here is the legend of the Fog Eater, Nebel Fresser from Germanic coastal myths. This entity is said to be a sea spirit that thrives on total sensory deprivation. It conjures an impossibly thick, silent fog, the sea fog, to paralyze its victims on land or sea. Once the victim is disoriented and unable to discern reality from illusion, the Fog Eater feeds on their panic. The belief is that the only thing that can dispel a Fog Eater's shroud is a continuous, genuine beam of human-maintained light, and right now, the light is dead, and the fog is creeping. You know that the presence is using the fog as its final stage of cover. It's shutting down your visibility, and the lighthouse's ability to function as a guide, ensuring no one can see what's about to happen here. You remember the mainstream scary fact of the screaming fog of Newfoundland, often recorded in the logs of old sailing vessels. This fog was said to carry the actual, audible, distorted cries of lost sailors, driving those who heard it to madness or suicide. The sound, coupled with the disorientation, was too much for the human mind. The fog enveloping you now is silent, which is almost worse. Researchers disagree on whether the physical appearance of an unnatural fog, which often ignores prevailing wind conditions, is the result of a rare meteorological phenomenon involving rapidly shifting pressure fronts and temperature gradients, or if the observed phenomena are symptomatic of the geological release of subterranean methane gas. You realize the missing gear must have been replaced by something else. Something organic, something that could be wound up and set in motion. The scraping, the grinder, was the sound of a tethered watcher's soul being forced to turn the mechanism by sheer psychic friction. Dark joke 1. This fog is so thick I tried to walk into the kitchen and ended up in the next county. On the bright side, at least I don't have to see the presence. Dark joke 2. I asked the missing gear where it went. It just sent me a postcard that said, Gone fishing, wouldn't recommend the rocks. Wish you were here. Sincerely your replacement. You need to find a way to the tower's base, to the source of the chaotic metal pinging beneath the floor. You cautiously move to the center of the room. You look down at the floorboards, trying to locate where Silas Thorne would have bolted his last warning. You find it, a thin, nearly invisible seam in the wooden floor, roughly circular, indicating a trapdoor. It's covered by an old, heavy iron chest, probably full of spare wicks and oil, or maybe just covering up the inevitable. Dark joke 3. I'm starting to think the lighthouse light is just an alarm clock. It only goes off when it's time to wake up the ancient drowned horror down in the basement. Shove the chest aside with an immense effort. Beneath it is a simple circular wooden hatch, reinforced with iron strapping and, just as Silas wrote, bolted shut from the inside with a series of heavy iron crossbeams. The man bolted himself in, or bolted something out. And the chaotic metallic pinging is definitely coming from directly beneath this hatch. You have to open it. It's the only way to the source, and perhaps the only way to stop the light. You stand over the bolted trapdoor. He called the light a trap, and he sealed the exit to the thing it was luring. The sea fog outside is now so thick it presses against the glass panes of the windows, turning the world into a featureless, terrifying white. You're completely blind to the outside world. You start attacking the iron cross beams with the heavy wrench you used earlier. The bolts groan and shriek, showering sparks and rust flakes. The sheer panic in the sound of the metal below makes you rush. Ping, ping, ping. It sounds like a large metal object, an anchor maybe, swinging wildly and striking the stone foundation. As you work, you pause to look out the nearest window, trying to pierce the oppressive white fog, and for a fleeting, sickening moment, you see it. A dark, towering shape, massive and indistinct, silhouetted against the diffused, blinding white of the sea fog. It's standing on the jagged rocks just below the lighthouse base, perfectly still. It's too tall to be a man, too angular to be a natural formation. It is the specter of the wreck, the culmination of the storm hag's work, waiting patiently. Waiting patiently, it is believed by the locals that this specter is tied to the catastrophic, unsolved wreck of the Ariadne's Hope, a luxury clipper that ran aground here 50 years ago, the very wreck Silas mentioned in his final entries. The mainstream scary fact is that the Ariadne's Hope disaster remains a cold case, not because of lost bodies, but because the vessel was found intact, with all sails furled, and the crew mysteriously gone, along with all the ship's navigational charts. The only thing left was a single, untouched sextant on the captain's table, pointed not toward the sea, but straight up. The thing standing out there in the fog seems to be looking up too. Right at the light, you notice a strange luminescence around the shape. It's not the lighthouse lights, it's a cold, internal, phosphorescent green glow, like something pulled from the deepest trenches of the ocean. The presence is here, and it's waiting for its guiding signal. You quickly turn back to the bolts, adrenaline masking your fear. You yank the last one free. The hatch doesn't fly open. It settles with a wet, sucking sound, the sound of ancient pressure being released. The cold from the lantern room, the heat from the living quarters, the smell of ozone, and now this, the profound, chilling stench of decaying seaweed and deep brine floods the room. The obscure horror tidbit for this moment is the old sailor's tale of kelp men. These are not ghosts, but physical manifestations, elementals formed from the dead sea kelp, mud, and the bone dust of lost mariners. They rise from the ocean floor during the thickest fogs, drawn by the sound of the light. They have no eyes or features, only the shape of a man, and their touch causes instant, irreversible decay. They are the crew of the hag ship, and they are here to retrieve the anchor-bound soul. The hatch is open. You shine your light down. It's a vertical stone shaft, descending into absolute blackness. The pinging metal is right there, echoing back the beam of your light. The stone walls are wet, slimy, with a thick, dark residue that smells of low tide and industrial waste. Researchers disagree on whether the physical structure of a well-built lighthouse foundation, designed to withstand immense hydrostatic pressure, is capable of acting as a natural acoustic waveguide, amplifying and distorting the mundane sounds of tidal action and structural settling, or if these auditory phenomena indicate genuine sonic residue from catastrophic historical events. Dark joke 1. I'm starting to think this lighthouse is just a really aggressive delivery service. They send a light, then a storm, then a fog, and finally a giant shadowy figure to make sure you get the package. You have to go down. The logic is simple. The presence is drawn by the light. The light is driven by the internal mechanism. The mechanism is somehow connected to whatever is making that desperate metal-on-stone sound down in the cellar. You need to stop the source of the frantic energy. Dark joke 2. I asked the specter if it was enjoying the view. It said, "It's all right, but the service is slow and the room is a bit too bright. You lower yourself carefully into the shaft, the stone cold and greasy under your hands. The smell is overwhelming, like a million rotten fish trying to escape a coffin. The metallic pinging is deafening now. It's the sound of something thrashing, fighting for its life, or maybe just fighting its duty. Dark joke 3. I brought a sandwich down here, but the specter gave me a dirty look. Guess he prefers an all-soul diet. It's healthier, you know. You drop the last few feet and land on something cold, hard, and wet, the cellar floor. The air is stagnant, heavy, and silent, except for the frantic pinging right next to you. You raise your flashlight. The room is tiny, circular, and filled with still salt water. You stand ankle-deep in the impossibly still, freezing salt water, which feels like liquid concrete around your boots. The moment you landed, the frantic metal pinging stopped, replaced by a sudden total silence, the kind of absolute quiet that suggests a predator has paused to listen to its prey. The cellar is small, a stone drum carved into the rock beneath the tower's foundation. The walls are dripping with that thick, slimy residue, and the air is heavy with the scent of decay and ancient brine. You swing your light across the scene, and you immediately spot the source of the noise. Against the far wall, mostly submerged in the brackish water, is an old, heavy iron cage, the kind used to transport dangerous equipment, or perhaps a small, caged animal. And inside the cage, lashed by thick, rusted nautical chains, is a giant, heavy bell. Not a ship's bell, but the kind of massive, iron clapper bell used in town squares. It's coated in the same thick, dark slime as the walls. This was the source of the pinging. Something or someone was violently swinging the bell's clapper against the iron bars of the cage. You lean closer, shining the light directly at the bell. The chain used to secure it is incredibly thick, but near the top, where it loops around a beam, the chain has been rubbed nearly through. The wear isn't from friction, it's from a persistent, forceful sawing motion. And then you hear it. Not the rhythmic grinding, not the metallic pinging, but a different sound entirely. The sound that Silas Thorne warned of, the sound that convinced him to seal the cellar. Whispers from the walls. They aren't loud, they are hushed, distorted, and seem to be coming from within the thick, solid stone walls surrounding you. They are not words, but the cadence of language. They overlap, a chorus of weak, pleading voices. You can only make out fragments. Don't leave, and too cold, and repeatedly, release. They are the collective, desperate voices of the souls bound to the coastline, drawn here by the light. The mainstream scary fact here is the concept of residual haunting, or the stone tape theory. This theory proposes that traumatic high-energy events, like a shipwreck or the final moments of a terrified keeper, can imprint themselves onto materials like stone, wood, or water, acting like a VCR tape that replays the event's sensory data, the sounds, the sights, even the emotional residue. The walls of this lighthouse are 50 years of recorded fear. And your presence, your focus, is playing back the tape. You realize the bell was being rung to drown out the whispers. The noise was a desperate form of self-defense for whatever poor soul was trapped down here, fighting the collective despair of the stone. The obscure horror tidbit concerns the siren's echo, a belief that when a coastal object absorbs too much death, the residual spiritual noise becomes physical. But instead of sounding like the human voices of the victims, the noise of the ancient primal song of the siren who took them, using their voices as a mask. The voices you hear are not the sailors pleading for help, they are the siren pleading for more sustenance. You look at the bell, thinking about its frantic fight against the cage. You reach toward the water, but pull back. The water is the key. The still salt water in the cellar isn't just leakage, it's a reservoir. Researchers disagree on whether human auditory processing is capable of synthesizing meaningful, coherent language from random noise and oral suggestion, a phenomenon known as pareidolia, or if the reported cases of disembodied voices emerging from silent spaces represent actual, non-physical acoustic phenomena. Dark joke 1. I tried to tell the stone walls that they need to stop gossiping. They just said, "Sorry, we only talk to the dead and people who haven't paid their phone bill." You check the journal again. The final coherent entry before the trapdoor was sealed describes the whispers. They are no longer outside. They are inside the mortar. They know my name. They plead for the light to remain dark, because the light doesn't guide them to safety. It guides him to them. Dark joke 2. If the bell keeps fighting that cage, I'm going to call the union. Even the souls of the damned deserve a proper grievance process. You shine the flashlight back at the bell. The rope attached to the clapper used for ringing is frayed. But the bell itself is swaying slightly, gently, rhythmically. Not violently, but as if being pushed by an unseen hand, a pendulum counting down to 0. The whispers grow momentarily louder, a collective hush of anticipation. Dark joke 3, I think the siren's echo needs a new album. These whispers are getting really repetitive. Too cold, release, don't leave. It's the same 3 tracks on repeat. You need to find the connection between this watery whispering cellar and the light mechanism above. You scan the walls for any pipe, any conduit. You see a depression in the center of the room, a large cylindrical hole in the stone floor, descending deeper into the rock, covered by the brackish water. It looks like a well, a deep, dark well, the chimney for the deep that Silas Thorne warned about. The deep, dark well submerged beneath the still, icy salt water of the cellar is the chimney for the deep. You step toward it, the cold water numbing your feet. The whispers from the walls intensify, rising to a cacophony of pleas and soft, distorted calls. They sound terrified of what you are approaching. You drop a small flat stone into the center of the well. It falls for a terrifyingly long time, echoing off the sides before you hear a muffled plink, the sound of stone hitting water. This well is impossibly deep. You look up at the stone ceiling, which is the floor of the keeper's living quarters. You now realize the profound, chilling truth about the tower's mechanism. The light isn't powered by electricity or oil anymore. It's powered by the tension of the dead, the frantic pinging of the bell, the rhythmic grinding of the mechanism. They were the sounds of the tower's clockwork of the curse in operation. The mechanism is a massive timepiece, designed not to track the hours, but to track the tides of despair. It is operating entirely on its own, running not as a guide for ships, but with a deliberate, haunting rhythm that seems to be summoning something. The mainstream scary fact that crystallizes this is the truth behind voodoo death or psychogenic death. This is the documented, though rare, anthropological phenomenon where a person who truly believes they have been cursed or have violated a serious taboo will simply lie down and die. The cause isn't physical, it is the utter loss of the will to live, triggered by overwhelming psychological dread. The lighthouse mechanism is doing this to the sea. It's cursing the water, creating a focus point of dread, and drawing in the ships that believe they are guided to safety. You kneel down at the well's edge, peering into the black water. You remember the obscure horror tidbit of the anchor-bound soul. The light is powered by Silas Thorne's despair. The despair is amplified by the sheer size of the Fresnel lens, and the mechanism is converting that despair into kinetic energy. It's a perpetual misery machine. You decide to retrieve the journal for one final read, needing to find the final, solid piece of evidence before you submerge your hand in the well. You climb out of the water, leaving a trail of dark, briny footprints. You find the page, the scribbled warning, and realize the final warning wasn't about the light, but about the presence. Silas wrote, "He is magnetic. The closer the light, the stronger his pull. He does not fear the light. He needs it. He is here to reclaim what was hidden." He didn't just seal the cellar. He was hiding something in it. Researchers disagree on whether the complex rhythmic scraping sounds and the spontaneous operation of machinery in derelict lighthouses can be fully explained by simple factors like thermal expansion, contraction of metal components, and wind-induced resonance, or if the consistent patterns reported suggest a form of intelligent, non-human interaction with the mechanics. You hear a low, wet thump from the well, followed by the softest of human sounds, a deep, shuddering inhalation. Something is down there, breathing the brackish water. Dark joke 1. This lighthouse is really dedicated to its job. It's been summoning the same dead horror for 50 years. Talk about job security. You look at the bell. It is now completely still. The whispers in the wall have stopped. The silence is the worst sound of all. Dark joke 2. What's the motto of the anchor-bound soul? If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. And then power a giant glass lamp with your endless agony. You realize the presence isn't waiting for the next flash. It's waiting for the light to become continuous. That's the ultimate signal. Dark joke 3. I've seen better plumbing in a haunted dollhouse. At least they use fresh water. This salt water smells like regret and old fish. You climb back to the open hatch where the journal lies. You see one more detail in the scrawled handwriting written right next to the image of the key. I secured it. In the deepest cold, the heart of the rotation is the key to the release. You realize the key you found in the mechanism wasn't the winding key. It was the key to something else, something hidden, and that something is in the well. The new context, the heart of the rotation is the key to the release, sends a jolt through you. The little iron key you found in the mechanism isn't for winding the clockwork. It's for unlocking whatever Silas Thorne hid down here, the very thing the presence is magnetically drawn to. You need to descend into the water-filled cellar again, this time with a purpose that goes beyond mere investigation. You slide the key into your pocket. The stone shaft is easier this time, though the slimy walls resist your grip. You drop back into the cellar, the cold, still salt water immediately soaking your trousers and boots. The well is right in front of you, a black, perfectly circular portal to the crushing void below. The air pressure in the cellar feels different now, almost physical, pressing against your eardrums. The silence is profound, the whispers utterly gone. The bell in the cage is motionless. You walk carefully toward the well, shining your light into the deep, dark column. Final full entry before his disappearance is now perfectly clear. The keeper's warning and the locked door. He wrote, "The presence has shown me the door. It is in the water. I cannot destroy the object, but I can contain it. I must lock it away and let the light die on its own. The tower will not guide him if he cannot retrieve his possession." You look down at the surface of the well. It's perfectly reflective, like black glass. You notice that the surrounding stone has several small, intricate carvings, not words, but symbols that look suspiciously like old nautical knots and anchors. They are all pointed down into the well. The mainstream scary fact that applies here is the historical phenomenon of witch stones or cursing wells. These are natural or man-made structures that were believed to possess the power to absorb or trap malevolent spirits, often by submerging them in running or stagnant water. Empires Greece and Truches as unaperific. The water was believed to neutralize the spirit's energy, trapping it. Silas Thorne wasn't just using a well, he was using a trap, hoping the water would hold the presence's possession. You carefully reach your hand down into the well, feeling along the slick stone edges just below the water line. The water is colder than the salt water in the cellar, a deep, bone-aching cold. Your fingers brush against something metallic. It's a latch. You pull your hand out. The latch is too complex. It's not meant to be opened by hand. You shine your light, confirming your suspicion. It's a heavy, circular bronze lock fitted into the stone itself, just beneath the surface of the water. This is the locked door Silas warned about. The obscure horror tidbit of the hour is the legend of the sunken key's promise. In Irish coastal folklore, it is said that any object submerged in a cursing well and locked with a key made of pure iron will remain locked until the key is returned to the mechanism that caused the pain. By placing the key in the lighthouse's gearworks, Silas ensured that the mechanism would forever attempt to turn and move the key, but could never release it to unlock the well. A brilliant, terrifying, and ultimately self-sacrificial act. Researchers disagree on whether the physical sensation of overwhelming, bone-deep cold in isolated environments is solely a function of ambient temperature and humidity, or if the phenomenon represents a quantifiable transfer of thermal energy caused by proximity to non-corporeal entities. Dark joke 1. I think Silas Thorne should have been an escape room designer. The hole locked the scary thing in the well and hid the key in the gear mechanism is pure genius. If only he'd remembered to include a hint card. You take the warm iron key from your pocket. It's the perfect size, meant for this. You realize the moment you insert the key and turn the lock, the presence outside, the specter waiting in the fog, will know. Dark joke 2. I'm getting tired of this whole ghost hunting thing. I always end up wetter than a politician in a swimming pool. The bell in the corner gives a slow single clunk against the iron bars. The bell is watching you. You hear a soft, almost feminine sigh that echoes once, clearly, from the dark column of the well. Dark joke 3. What's the difference between a good lighthouse keeper and a bad one? A good one gets replaced. A bad one becomes the replacement. You take a deep breath, the briny, decaying air stinging your nostrils. You lower the iron key into the black water, guiding it toward the bronze lock. The moment the iron touches the brass, a dull, resonant boom echoes through the tower, and the key begins to vibrate violently in your hand, desperate to be turned. The key is screaming in your hand, a high-frequency vibration that feels less like metal and more like agony. You shove the key into the lock, a perfect, satisfying click resonating in the watery silence of the cellar. This is it. This is the act that undoes 50 years of stillness. You turn the key. The lock doesn't click open, it hisses. A long, drawn-out sound of gaseous release. The bronze lock melts away into nothing, dissolving into the well water. You pull your hand back. The water surface is still black glass. But then the water begins to churn, not violently, but slowly, deliberately. The surface of the well swells slightly, and a massive object, roughly spherical and wrapped in heavy, rusted iron chains, begins to rise from the depths. It's the possession. It's the very reason the presence is drawn here, and the object Silas Thorne died to hide. The object breaks the surface of the water, a massive leaden sphere roughly the size of a barrel, completely wrapped in the chains. The water cascading off it is impossibly thick, like black ink, and the smell of decay and old brine is now overwhelming, stinging your eyes and burning your throat. This is the descent into the dark and the salt water. This small cellar is now the most toxic place on Earth. The mainstream scary fact here relates to the concept of Haitian zombification, which in some cultural contexts involves the deliberate use of powerful, neurotoxic substances, often derived from deep-sea life like pufferfish, to induce a state of suspended animation, rendering the victim powerless but alive. The toxic air and briny water of the cellar feel like they're deliberately trying to paralyze your mind, ensuring you can't fight what you've just unleashed. You look closely at the sphere. The chains are wrapped so tightly they seem to be cutting into the metal, but between the rusted links, you can see the metal itself is not lead or iron. It looks like polished, dark granite, shimmering slightly. The obscure horror tidbit of the hour comes from ancient Phoenician seafaring texts, the legend of the tomb sphere. It was believed that the only way to contain a god or demon of the deep was to trap its heart, a small, physical manifestation, in a sphere of sea-polished granite, then bind it with chains that had touched the bones of 100 drowned men. The sphere had to be perpetually submerged in water to keep the entity dormant. By unlocking the lock, you haven't released the sphere, you've released the inhibition of the presence. You hear the rhythmic scraping of the grinders start up again, fast and furious, high above you. The whole tower is vibrating, and now it's accompanied by a low, powerful hum that makes your teeth ache. The light is turning on. Researchers still argue whether the complex biochemical compounds found in deep-sea environments, capable of inducing powerful hallucinations and temporary paralysis in mammals, are sufficiently stable to remain toxic for decades, or if the continued presence of a noxious atmosphere in the cellar suggests an ongoing, non-physical source of toxic energy. Dark joke 1. I think I prefer the silence. At least when the presence was quiet, I didn't feel like my head was going to explode into a million tiny pieces. The granite sphere begins to rock slightly on the surface of the well water. The water around it is swirling, creating a slow, malevolent whirlpool. The scent of brine and decay is so strong you have to cover your mouth. Dark joke 2. I opened the well and all I got was this lousy, radioactive granite orb wrapped in chains. Talk about false advertising. You look up at the heavy iron cage. The bell is still, but the small, child-sized handprints on the cage are suddenly glistening, wet with the dark brine from the well. The unseen hands are reaching for the sphere, the possession. Dark joke 3. I heard the granite sphere is a terrible conversationalist. Very stoic. It only talks about death and the crushing weight of the sea, just like my uncle. The spear rocks harder, and the iron chains binding it creak in protest. You know you have only moments before the presence outside, the specter of the wreck, is fully guided here. You need to look closer at the sphere, find out exactly what it is. You shine your light, searching for any symbol or marking. The black granite tomb sphere is now rotating slowly on the surface of the well, turning with the malevolent, dark whirlpool it has created. The chains are straining, letting you see the highly polished, obsidian surface beneath the rust. The scent of old brine and decay is a living entity, clawing at your senses. You raise your flashlight to study the surface of the sphere, looking for the inscription you know must be there. And then you realize the chains aren't just binding it, they are strategically placed to hide the single critical focal point of the granite. But before you can adjust your light, you look down into the water, and the surface of the well shifts again, becoming momentarily perfectly calm. It's no longer a black mirror reflecting the stone ceiling. The mirror in the well is now reflecting something else. It's a face, but it's not yours. The spectral image in the water is that of an old man with wide, terrified eyes, his beard long and tangled, his face white as salt. It's the spectral image of the last keeper, Silas Thorne, and he is staring back at you with a look of frantic, silent warning. The water is acting as a conduit, offering you a brief, horrifying glimpse of the anchor-bound soul, trapped and tethered to his eternal duty. The mainstream scary fact here is the widely reported phenomenon of the residual image, or visions in the glass. Historical accounts from the 17th to 19th centuries detail instances where people looked into mirrors, still water or polished metal surfaces in haunted locations and saw the faces of the deceased instead of their own. This is often associated with intense emotional residue, the spirit projecting its last moment of trauma onto the nearest reflective surface. Silas is showing you his final terror. The reflection stays for only a second, but it conveys the truth. You shouldn't have opened the lock. The granite sphere gives a sudden, violent lurch, and the image of Silas Thorne is replaced by a massive, elongated shadow stretching across the entire surface of the water. a shadow that doesn't belong to the sphere or the light above. It is the shadow of the presence, the specter of the wreck. Now for the obscure horror tidbit. There is an old tradition among sailors regarding the shadow in the binnacle. If a captain dies by drowning, their finny shadow is said to sink with them, but it retains the ability to navigate. If it rises again and is reflected in the ship's compass binnacle, it directs the vessel or the person who sees it to the source of its original demise. The shadow in the well is Silas's killer, here to claim the possession. The shoo of the grinder above is reaching a frantic, deafening speed. The air is crackling with energy, and you can smell the ozone from the light. You notice something on the wall above the well, a small bronze plaque that was hidden by the chains of the bell cage. It's the final piece of the submerged truth. The plaque bears an inscription, barely legible beneath the brine residue. Here lies the heart of the Ariadne, claimed by the sea god in retribution for the crime of hubris. The sphere isn't a heart of a demon. It's the heart of the sunken ship, the Ariadne's hope, a physical manifestation of the tragedy, now claimed by an entity of the deep. It is a sacrifice, and the presence is here to collect it. Researchers disagree on whether the reflection of a non-existent entity in a liquid medium represents a true optical or photonic anomaly caused by localized energy disruption, or if the phenomenon is a purely psychological event, a form of acute, stress-induced visual hallucination. Dark joke 1. I'm starting to think Silas Thorne was a drama queen, locking up a granite ship heart in a well and then ghosting into a gear mechanism. Could have just left a note. You grab your flashlight and desperately try to shine it through the gaps in the chains. You see a single smooth indentation on the granite sphere, a groove that exactly matches the intricate, non-random scratches you saw on the light mechanism earlier. The sphere and the light are one. Dark joke 2. I asked the shadow in the well for a dating tip. It said, be mysterious, appear only in reflective surfaces, and always smell faintly of brine. I think I'll stick to Tinder. You know what's coming next. The light is fully active, guided by the turning mechanism, and it's illuminating the chimney for the deep. The presence is rising. Dark joke 3. I should have invested in waterproof socks before coming here. Now I'm cold, terrified, and I'll probably get foot fungus. That's the real horror story. You look up at the opening of the hatch. The rhythmic hum of the light is now a massive, continuous roar, filling the entire shaft. You hear the deep, booming crash of a wave hitting the side of the lighthouse. But this time, it is not the sound of water. It is the sound of something heavy making contact with the stone foundation. The rhythmic, roaring hum of the lens mechanism above is now continuous, a massive, grinding sound that signals the final flash and the release. You look up the shaft, and the light is pulsing, not flashing a sequence, but bathing the entire stone drum in blinding, frantic white light. It's like being trapped inside a photographic flashbulb, and every pulse is accompanied by the stench of ozone and an overwhelming, crushing weight of pressure. The granite tomb sphere is lifted clean out of the well by the churning water, hovering silently in the air above the waterline, suspended by the energy of the light. The iron chains that bind it are vibrating so rapidly they are humming a terrifying low note. The water in the cellar is beginning to bubble and boil, despite the icy temperature. The whispers from the walls are back, but they've changed. They are no longer pleading for release. They are a chorus of manic, distorted cheering. You realize the horrifying truth. The light is guiding something to the shore. It's not keeping the curse in, it's serving its master. The continuous light is the presence's personal beacon. The presence is the specter of the wreck, the sea god entity, and the light is its invitation, its eye, its final claim on the possession. The mainstream scary fact here is the concept of the luring light, or fairy fire, a legend found in many coastal cultures. Unlike a reliable beacon, the luring light is a false promise, a supernatural glow that appears to guide sailors to safety, but is actually an intelligent deception designed to lure them onto hidden rocks or into the path of a waiting predator. The Point Despair lighthouse has ceased being a guide and is now a luring light for the specter. The entire cellar is now a resonant chamber for the massive, continuous white light. The light is so bright you have to shield your eyes, but the spectral face of Silas Thorne is burned into your vision, a panicked mask of white-hot regret. The granite sphere suddenly cracks, a massive loud sound like a gunshot. A jagged line splits the stone, running from the top to the bottom, and from the crack seeps a liquid that is not water, but black, shimmering oil. The obscure horror tidbit for this moment is the lore of the oil of the sea god. In certain island traditions, the release of this oil, dark, viscous, and powerfully magnetic, is the final sign that the sea god has accepted the offering. The oil has a powerful luring effect, driving all life that smells it toward the coast where it was released. The specter outside doesn't need the light anymore. It only needed the light to release the oil. Researchers disagree on whether the physical appearance of an inexplicable, dark, viscous liquid in geological contexts can be attributed to natural subterranean oil or asphalt seepage, or if the sudden catastrophic release of such a substance should be categorized as an extreme, localized geothermal event. Dark joke 1. Well, at least I know where the lighthouse keeper stores his motor oil. Too bad it's cursed and smells like 10,000 years of death. The spear is rotating faster and faster. The light is a continuous, blinding roar. The floor is vibrating, and you hear a new sound, the sound of stone cracking above you. The specter is reaching the base. Dark joke 2. I should send a letter to Silas Thorne's next of kin. Dear Mrs. Thorne, your husband failed in his mission to stop the ancient sea horror, and now I'm soaking wet. Send help, or at least a dry towel. You have to get out now. The specter is ascending. The presence is here. You scramble back toward the wall, desperate to climb the shaft. You realize the sphere is about to shatter. Dark joke 3. I heard the specter is a bit of a clean freak. He hates dust, loves his light, and always insists on black granite for his accessories. Very high maintenance. You reach the cold, slimy shaft. You look back at the possession. The black oil coating the walls is now faintly, horribly phosphorescent, glowing with an internal green light. The specter is here. You start climbing. You scramble up the dark, slimy shaft, driven by the intense, choking smell of the glowing black oil. The stone walls are cold and slick, but the green phosphorescence of the oil lights your way, a sickly internal glow that illuminates every handhold and every chilling detail. You burst out of the hatch and into the keeper's quarters. The silence is profound again, broken only by your gasping breaths. The continuous hum is gone. The final flash is over. The power source has been depleted, the precision destroyed. The specter has its oil, its ultimate lure. The entire keeper's room is filled with a faint green miasma. You grab the journal and the iron key. The key is now ice cold and dull. You don't look at the lantern room. You don't need to. You know it's there. You flee down the spiral stairs, taking them 3 at a time, the iron steps groaning under your panic. You are in a race against the dawn, and against the immense patient thing that is now standing in the stone heart of the tower. You crash through the massive oak door at the base of the lighthouse, stumbling out onto the shingle beach. The sea air hits you, sharp and clean, but you still smell the decaying brine. The storm is gone. The wind is a gentle, tired breeze. The sea fog is lifting, receding back into the ocean like a defeated curtain. You look back at Point Despair Lighthouse. It stands silent, dark, and utterly dead, just as it was 50 years ago. But now you know it's not dead, it's simply dormant, waiting for the next keeper to restart its clockwork. As dawn approaches, the sky is a clean, sharp pink and orange. The sight of the sunrise, the sheer normality of it, is a cruel joke. You walk toward the high tide line, just where the small waves are washing up on the shore, and there it is. The final, horrifying detail washes up on the beach. It's a book. It's not the water-damaged leather of Silas Thorne's journal, but a brand new, unblemished, crisp black ledger bound in fresh vinyl. It hasn't been touched by water, or brine, or the decay of the deep. It is perfectly dry. You lean down and pick it up. It's heavy and utterly pristine. First page is blank. The cover is unlabeled. But on the second page, in immaculate, precise copperplate handwriting, the same handwriting as Silas Thorne's earliest entries, are 3 words written in dark, wet ink that must have been inscribed just moments ago. Keeper's log, entry 1. The tower is waiting for the next keeper. The specter has its oil, its lure, and the light has its new logbook, the record-keeping of its next victim. The anchor-bound soul, Silas Thorne, has been replaced. The mainstream scary fact here is the concept of the mandatory continuation in folklore, a curse that only releases the current victim when a suitable replacement has been found and formally documented. I think that by surviving, you haven't broken the curse. You've merely become the necessary intermediary, the one who left the final piece of the puzzle for the next person to find. The obscure horror tidbit is the notion of shore gifts left by the ocean's entities that appear to be helpful or normal objects, but are actually anchors for future tragedy. The new logbook is a shore gift, a beautiful lie waiting for an unwary hand. Researchers disagree on whether the psychological trauma experienced by witnesses to extreme paranormal events leads to genuine post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, requiring clinical intervention, or if the symptoms are better classified as a form of moral injury resulting from contact with evidence that invalidates fundamental physical and existential laws. Dark joke 1. I'm going to give this new logbook a terrible review on Amazon. 0 stars. The plot is too repetitive, and the final scene is highly predictable. You realize the specter knew you would flee. It needed you to survive just long enough to retrieve the new logbook, take it away from the decaying lighthouse, and leave it in a visible, appealing spot for the next curious traveler. Dark joke 2. I bet the presence is furiously checking its mailbox. Did the delivery service lose him again? You drop the new logbook onto the sand. It lands softly, but instantly begins to sink slightly into the loose shingle, a clean black square against the pink morning. You turn and walk away, the sound of your boots crunching the shingles, leaving the silence, the specter, and the unending duty of point despair behind you. The whole world is wide awake, but you know you're the only one who has seen the night's true purpose. Dark joke 3. I've learned one thing tonight. Never trust a lighthouse that's been dark for 50 years. They're moody, they're demanding, and they have way too much time on their hands. You've escaped the tower, but the truth of the light that it only serves the darkness is now sealed inside you, and you walk away, leaving the new logbook waiting for the next keeper. The sun is up now, isn't it? That strong, clean, golden light. It washes everything in a warmth that seems almost offensive after the kind of night you've just experienced. You can blink away the phantom glow of the lighthouse, the white-hot flash of the mechanism, the sickly internal green of the oil. The cold is retreating, leaving only a lingering chill that settles deep in your bones. You're back in your room, lying in your bed. The walls are solid, familiar. That low hum you hear is just your fan, just your computer. It's not the grinder. It's not the sound of a tethered soul being forced into eternal labor. But still, you feel the weight of that black granite sphere, don't you? The chilling knowledge that the greatest beacons, the symbols of safety and guidance, can be inverted, repurposed to serve the deepest, darkest intent. The light that was supposed to save the ships was only ever a chimney, drawing up the specter from the deep to reclaim his possession. Silas Thorne failed, and now you've seen why. He didn't lock the curse in, he merely pressed pause, waiting for someone with your specific brand of curiosity to come along and press play. You didn't break the curse, you only witnessed its continuation. That's what makes the scariest stories stick with you. They don't end in an obvious bloodbath. They end with a quiet, insidious truth. The horror finds a new routine. It finds a new logbook. The sea is still out there, just beyond your awareness, and that fog is always waiting to roll in, isn't it? It's not just water vapor, it's a curtain for the things that need cover. You think about that new logbook sitting on the wet, pink-lit sand. It looks so tempting, so clean. A fresh start. The next chapter in a very, very old book. Let your breathing slow down. Let the world outside your window become real again. The light is good. The morning is quiet. But you know that the anchor-bound soul is still up there in the silent, empty tower. He's finished his part, and the presence is satisfied. You did your duty tonight. You listened to the story. Now, the story's listening to you. Just try to remember that your fan is just a fan. The shadows are just shadows. And the iron key to the light's final, devastating purpose is very, very far away. Or is it? Take a slow, deep breath. The scent of brine is fading now. Fade to a whisper. Just sleep.